In the gleaming towers of Manhattan, where ambition pierces the clouds and dreams are bought and sold like commodities, there lived a man who had forgotten the language of his own heart. Gregory Thorn, at 32, commanded an empire worth $12 billion, yet possessed not a single genuine relationship. His penthouse apartment, suspended 40 floors above the chaos of New York City, was a monument to success and a mausoleum of human connection. What Gregory didn't know, as he stood in his marble-floored office that December morning, was that a 23-year-old woman named Sarah Chen would soon shatter the carefully constructed walls around his frozen heart, not through seduction or manipulation, but through something far more powerful, the raw, unfiltered truth of human emotion. This is the story of how tears can melt ice, how vulnerability can conquer power, and how sometimes the people we overlook hold the keys to who we're meant to become. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The alarm buzzed at precisely 4:47 a.m. in Gregory Thorn's penthouse, 3 minutes earlier than scheduled. He didn't jolt awake. Gregory Thorn never jolted. His eyes simply opened, clear and calculating, as if sleep were merely another business transaction he'd successfully negotiated. The automated blinds hadn't yet revealed the pre-dawn Manhattan skyline, but Gregory was already reaching for his phone, fingers dancing across the screen to check overnight market fluctuations in Tokyo and London. Predictable, he murmured, noting a 0.3% dip in his tech holdings. His voice carried the same tone, whether discussing million-dollar losses or the weather. Detached, analytical, emotionless. The penthouse around him reflected its owner's philosophy perfectly. Every surface was either black marble, brushed steel, or floor-to-ceiling glass. No photographs adorned the walls, no personal mementos cluttered the spaces. Instead, abstract art in stark geometric patterns commanded attention, pieces worth more than most people's houses, selected not for beauty, but for investment potential. The furniture, all sharp angles and uncomfortable perfection, seemed designed to discourage lingering. Even the view, arguably the most breathtaking panorama of New York City money could buy, felt cold through the tinted windows that filtered out warmth along with glare. Gregory's morning routine was as precise as Swiss clockwork. 45 minutes of high-intensity interval training in his private gym, where mirrors reflected back a physique maintained not for vanity, but for efficiency. 20 minutes in his temperature-controlled shower, where he mentally rehearsed the day's power plays, while expensive Italian soap washed away any remnant of human vulnerability. Exactly 12 minutes to dress in one of 30 identical charcoal suits, each tailored to perfection by the same Savile Row craftsman who'd served his father. Breakfast was consumed, standing at the kitchen's marble island. 2 egg whites, black coffee, and a vitamin regimen calculated by his personal physician. No newspaper. Gregory received his news through curated digital briefings that filtered out anything irrelevant to profit margins. No music, silence sharpened focus, no lingering. Time was money, and Gregory Thorn was the richest man in the room wherever he went by 6:15 a.m. His private elevator descended 40 floors to the underground garage, where Marcus, his driver for the past 8 years, waited beside the bulletproof black sedan. Marcus had learned long ago not to attempt conversation. A simple nod acknowledged Gregory's presence, and the partition between front and back seats remained firmly closed. During the 20-minute drive to Thorn Industries headquarters, Gregory conducted his first conference call of the day with his Hong Kong division, his voice as flat and emotionless as if he were reading stock prices. The Thorn Industries building rose 52 stories above Midtown Manhattan, its glass and steel facade reflecting the ambition of its creator. Gregory's father, William Thorn, had built the foundation of the empire through real estate speculation and political connections. But Gregory had transformed it into something far more ruthless and efficient, a diversified conglomerate with tentacles in technology, finance, defense contracts, and media. Where his father had been gregarious and charming, Gregory was calculated and cold. Where William had maintained friendships alongside business relationships, Gregory saw only assets and liabilities. The executive floor buzzed with quiet efficiency as Gregory emerged from his private elevator. His assistant, Patricia Webb, a woman in her 50s who'd worked for 3 Fortune 500 CEOs before Gregory, had already arranged his schedule with military precision. Coffee waited at exactly the right temperature. Documents were organized in order of priority. Even the air seemed to hold its breath in Gregory's presence. "The Morrison acquisition papers are on your desk," Patricia reported in clipped tones. She'd learned to communicate in bullet points rather than sentences. Legal flagged 2 clauses in Section 14. "The board meeting materials are in the red folder. Senator Harrison's office confirmed lunch at 1:30. Gregory nodded once, his standard acknowledgement of received information. He neither thanked Patricia nor acknowledged her weekend overtime to prepare these materials. In Gregory's worldview, people were paid to perform functions. Gratitude was inefficiency. Recognition was weakness. His corner office occupied the entire northwestern section of the 52nd floor, with windows offering a commanding view of Central Park and the Hudson River. Yet Gregory rarely looked at the view. His attention focused entirely on the curved desk made from a single piece of mahogany, where 3 monitors displayed real-time market data, corporate intelligence, and his personal wealth tracker, a number that climbed steadily higher each day, though it brought him no visible satisfaction. The morning progressed through a series of meetings that could have been choreographed. Department heads presented quarterly reports with the enthusiasm of condemned prisoners. Gregory listened without expression, occasionally asking questions that exposed weaknesses in their presentations with surgical precision. He approved budget cuts that would eliminate 47 jobs in the Denver office with the same tone he might use to order lunch. When the head of human resources mentioned employee morale concerns, Gregory's response was characteristic. "I pay them to be productive, not happy." Next item. By mid-morning, 3 executives had been reduced to nervous stammering under Gregory's ice-cold stare. His reputation preceded him into every room. The man who'd fired his own cousin for missing quarterly projections by 2%, who dissolved partnerships with companies owned by family friends without a moment's hesitation, who'd never been seen to laugh, cry, or express surprise. Gregory Thorn was a force of nature, as predictable and devastating as a glacier. His philosophy was simple and absolute. Emotions were weakness, relationships were leverage, and sentiment was the enemy of profit. He'd learned these lessons at his father's knee, but where William Thorn had maintained a facade of warmth for public consumption, Gregory had dispensed with pretense entirely. He was what American capitalism looked like when stripped of all humanity, pure, efficient, and utterly without mercy. The world had taught Gregory that vulnerability invited exploitation, that trust led to betrayal, and that the only currency worth accumulating was power. He'd internalized these lessons so completely that they'd become his DNA, his operating system, his identity. Gregory Thorn wasn't cruel by intention. He simply existed in a reality where human emotion was an unnecessary complication, a bug in the program of success that needed to be eliminated. As noon approached and the December sun struggled to warm the glass walls of his office, Gregory reviewed acquisition targets with the same dispassion a chess master might study the board. Companies were pieces to be moved. Employees were resources to be optimized, and competitors were obstacles to be eliminated. He'd built an empire on this foundation of calculated indifference, and it had never occurred to him to question whether the cost of his success might be more than he realized. In a few hours, Sarah Chen would arrive for her first day of work. carrying with her a capacity for emotion that would prove more powerful than all of Gregory's billions. But for now, in this moment, Gregory Thorn ruled his kingdom of ice with absolute authority, believing himself invincible and utterly alone by choice. The intercom buzzed. Patricia's voice cut through the silence. "Sir, the new hire for the executive cleaning staff is here for orientation." Gregory didn't look up from his documents. In his world, cleaning staff were as invisible as the air they breathed, as inconsequential as the dust they removed. He had no idea that the young woman waiting in Patricia's office would soon teach him the most important lesson of his life, that some things cannot be bought, controlled, or conquered. They can only be felt. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Sarah Chen stepped off the subway at 59th Street, clutching a worn leather purse that had belonged to her grandmother. The December morning air bit through her second-hand coat as she emerged into the chaos of Manhattan, but she barely noticed the cold. Today marked the beginning of everything. She'd worked toward a job at Thorn Industries that would finally allow her to support her ailing mother and pay for her night classes at Hunter College. At 23, Sarah carried herself with quiet dignity despite the weight of responsibilities that would have crushed someone twice her age. Her father had died in a construction accident when she was 17, leaving behind medical bills and a grieving wife whose diabetes had worsened with stress. Sarah had abandoned her dreams of studying art therapy, dropping out of college to work 3 jobs: morning shifts at a diner in Queens, afternoon hours cleaning office buildings, and weekend work at a laundromat. For 6 years, she'd lived on 4 hours of sleep and determination. The opportunity at Thorn Industries had come through Mrs. Rodriguez, an elderly woman Sarah helped with grocery shopping who happened to know someone in the building's management company. "They need someone trustworthy for the executive floors," Mrs. Rodriguez had explained. "Someone who can work around important people without causing problems." The pay was more than Sarah's 3 jobs combined, with benefits that included health insurance, something she'd never been able to afford. Sarah had spent her last $20 on a professional-looking blouse from the thrift store and borrowed interview shoes from her neighbor. She'd practiced walking in them for hours, wanting to make the right impression. The job description was simple: maintain the cleanliness and organization of the executive level, work discreetly around high-level meetings, and above all, remain invisible to the company's leadership. As she approached the gleaming Thorn Industries building, Sarah felt a familiar flutter of anxiety mixed with hope. The structure towered above her like a monument to everything she'd never had: security, success, a future free from the constant fear of unpaid bills. She'd researched Gregory Thorn online, finding articles that described him as brilliant but ruthless, innovative but completely without warmth. The business magazines painted him as a machine built for profit, incapable of human connection. Sarah didn't judge him for it. In her experience, survival often required building walls. The employee entrance led her through a maze of security checkpoints and orientation procedures. Sarah filled out forms with her careful, precise handwriting, listened to safety presentations, and received her identification badge with a photo that made her look younger than her years. The supervisor, Mr. Martinez, was a kind man in his 50s who'd worked in building maintenance for decades. "The executive level is different," he explained as they rode the elevator to the 52nd floor. "You'll rarely see the executives themselves, but when you do, you don't speak unless spoken to. You don't make eye contact. You finish your work quickly and move on. Mr. Thorn especially values discretion above everything else." Sarah nodded, understanding the unspoken message. She was being hired to be a ghost, to maintain perfection while remaining perfectly invisible. It wasn't so different from her other jobs, where she'd learned to clean around sleeping businessmen in office buildings or serve impatient customers at the diner without taking their rudeness personally. Invisibility was a skill she'd mastered out of necessity. The executive floor took her breath away. She'd never seen such luxury. Marble that gleamed like mirrors, artwork that probably cost more than her family's apartment rent for a year, furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum. Everything was pristine, geometric, coldly beautiful. It felt less like a workplace than a temple to success, intimidating and magnificent. Mr. Martinez introduced her to the other maintenance staff, Maria, who'd worked the evening shift for 15 years, and James, who handled the lower executive floors. Both warned her about Gregory Thorn, with the same mixture of respect and fear she'd seen in Mr. Martinez's eyes. "He's not mean," Maria explained. "He's just empty, like looking at a statue. I've been cleaning his office for 3 years, and he's never once acknowledged I exist. It's like he sees right through you." Sarah's first task was to familiarize herself with the layout and procedures. She learned the locations of supply closets, the preferred cleaning products for different surfaces, the schedule that would keep her work invisible to the executives. Her shift would begin at 6 a.m. before most of the leadership arrived, with additional duties during lunch hours when offices were typically empty. As she worked through her orientation, Sarah caught glimpses of the business world she'd never experienced. Executives in $1,000 suits discussed mergers worth millions of dollars. Phone calls determined the fate of factories in distant cities. Every decision rippled outward to affect thousands of lives. It was fascinating and terrifying, this glimpse into a level of power she'd never imagined. At 11:30 a.m., Patricia Webb appeared in the break room, where Sarah was reviewing her training materials. Patricia moved with the efficiency of someone who'd learned to anticipate needs before they were voiced. Her grey hair pulled back in a perfect bun, her expression professionally neutral. "You're the new cleaning staff for the executive level?" Patricia asked, though it wasn't really a question. "Yes, ma'am." "Sarah Chen." Patricia's eyes assessed her quickly, her posture, her clothing, her demeanor. Sarah had the unsettling feeling of being catalogued and filed away in some mental database. "Mr. Thorn will be in meetings most of the afternoon. His office will need attention around 2 p.m. You'll have approximately 20 minutes. The desk is never to be touched. Work around it. The bookshelf requires dusting, but books are not to be moved. Windows need cleaning, but use only the specified solution. Questions?" Sarah shook her head. Patricia's instructions felt like a military briefing, precise and non-negotiable. "One more thing," Patricia added, her voice dropping slightly. "Mr. Thorn doesn't tolerate disruption. If you encounter him, continue your work quietly and leave as soon as possible. He has no patience for small talk or explanations." "Understood." "Yes, ma'am." As Patricia departed, Sarah felt the weight of expectation settling on her shoulders. This job was more than just cleaning. It was about maintaining the perfect sterile environment that Gregory Thorn required to function. She was being hired to be a guardian of his isolation, ensuring that no human messiness intruded on his carefully controlled world. The afternoon passed in intensive training. Sarah learned the specific techniques required for marble surfaces, the proper way to clean electronic equipment without damaging it, the art of working around valuable art pieces without leaving fingerprints or scratches. Everything had to be perfect, because perfection was the only standard Gregory Thorn accepted. At 1:45 p.m., Sarah gathered her supplies and made her way to Gregory Thorn's office. The space was even more imposing than she'd expected. Massive windows offering a commanding view of the city. Furniture that looked like it had been carved from single pieces of stone. An atmosphere of power so thick it was almost tangible. This wasn't just an office. It was a throne room designed to intimidate and impress. Sarah began her work methodically, starting with the windows farthest from the door. The cleaning solution smeared initially, and she had to work carefully to achieve the streak-free finish that was obviously expected. As she worked, she couldn't help but notice the complete absence of personal items. No family photos, no souvenirs, no evidence that a human being actually spent time in this space. It was like cleaning a showroom rather than someone's workplace. She was halfway through the second window when she heard the elevator doors open in the reception area. Patricia's voice carried clearly. "Sir, the Morrison files are ready for your review, Gregory." Thorn was returning early from his lunch meeting. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she realized she was about to encounter the man whose reputation preceded him like a cold wind. She could continue cleaning and hope he ignored her, or she could quickly gather her supplies and leave. Before she could decide, she heard footsteps approaching the office door. In moments, she would come face to face with the Ice King himself, though neither of them yet understood that this seemingly insignificant encounter would change both of their lives forever. The door opened, and Gregory Thorn stepped into his domain, his presence filling the room like winter air. For the first time in her life, Sarah Chen was about to meet someone whose capacity for emotional emptiness matched her own desperate need to feel hope. Gregory Thorn entered his office with his usual measured stride, his mind already processing the Morrison acquisition details Patricia had prepared. The lunch meeting with Senator Harrison had been productive. 3 key regulatory obstacles removed with the promise of a substantial campaign contribution. It was the kind of transaction Gregory executed flawlessly, quid pro quo without sentiment, power exchanged for power. He was halfway to his desk when he noticed her. A young woman stood frozen by the windows, cleaning supplies clutched in her hands like defensive weapons. She wore a simple blue blouse and black slacks that had clearly seen better days, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. What struck Gregory wasn't her appearance. He rarely registered such details, but her absolute stillness. She looked like a deer caught in headlights, paralyzed by his presence. "Continue your work," Gregory said curtly, not breaking stride toward his desk. He'd learned long ago that acknowledging service staff beyond basic commands only encouraged unwanted interaction. People in her position were paid to be invisible. The best ones achieved that invisibility seamlessly. But instead of the immediate compliance he expected, Gregory heard something unexpected. A sharp intake of breath, followed by the sound of liquid spilling. He turned to see the young woman staring at a puddle of cleaning solution spreading across the marble floor. Her face flushed with mortification. "I'm so sorry," Sarah whispered, dropping to her knees immediately to contain the spill with paper towels from her cart. "I'll clean this up right away." I'm so sorry." Gregory watched this display of panic with clinical detachment. In his experience, people revealed their true nature under pressure. Some became aggressive, others made excuses, many simply fled. This woman was apologizing with the desperate intensity of someone who couldn't afford to lose this job. "How long have you worked here?" Gregory asked, settling behind his desk as Sarah frantically mopped the spilled solution. "This is my first day." "Sir?" Her voice was barely audible, and she didn't look up from her cleaning. "First day." Gregory repeated the words as if they explained everything. "And your previous experience?" Sarah's hands stilled for a moment. The question felt like a trap, though she couldn't understand why a billionaire would care about her work history. "Office cleaning, sir. Restaurant service. Various positions, Gregory echoed again. He found himself studying her more carefully, not out of interest, but with the analytical attention he applied to all puzzles. Most people in service positions adopted either obsequiousness or resentment when dealing with authority. This woman displayed neither. Instead, she radiated something Gregory couldn't immediately categorize, a combination of dignity and desperation that intrigued him despite himself. Sarah finished cleaning the spill and stood slowly, her supplies reorganized with practiced efficiency. She was preparing to leave when Gregory's voice stopped her. "The Morrison files on my desk. What do you see when you look at them?" The question was so unexpected that Sarah actually looked directly at him for the first time. Gregory found himself meeting eyes that were warm brown, intelligent, and completely bewildered by his question. I I don't understand, sir. The papers. The documents. What do you observe about them? Sarah's gaze flicked nervously to his desk, where thick folders and legal documents were arranged in precise stacks. She seemed to be calculating whether answering was more dangerous than refusing. They're organized very carefully, she said finally. Everything in straight lines, nothing overlapping. And what does that suggest to you? Sarah looked at him again, and Gregory saw her making a decision to trust that his question was genuine rather than a test designed to humiliate her. It suggests that order is very important to you, she said quietly. That maybe this order feels threatening. The response was so unexpected that Gregory actually leaned back in his chair. In 32 years, no one had ever suggested that his need for control stemmed from fear. The observation was unsophisticated, but uncomfortably perceptive. Threatening, Gregory repeated, tasting the word. An interesting choice of terminology. I'm sorry, sir. I shouldn't have. Why do you apologize constantly? The question cut through Sarah's prepared deflection like a blade. She stood there, cleaning supplies in hand, staring at this powerful man who was asking questions no one had ever asked her. Because, Sarah began, then stopped. The honest answer felt too vulnerable to speak aloud. Because apologies were armor against anger. Because taking blame quickly prevented escalation. Because in her world, being sorry first often meant being hurt less. Because mistakes have consequences, she finished instead. Gregory nodded slowly. Yes, they do. Tell me about your consequences. The conversation had moved so far from normal employer-employee interaction that Sarah felt unmoored. This wasn't how powerful men talk to cleaning staff. But something in Gregory's tone, not warm, but genuinely curious, made her answer honestly. I have responsibilities that don't allow for mistakes, she said. People depending on me. If I lose this job... She didn't finish the sentence, but Gregory heard the unspoken implications. He recognized the mathematics of desperation, though he'd never experienced them personally. This woman worked not for advancement or fulfillment, but for survival. What kind of responsibilities? My mother is sick. She needs medication, doctor visits. I'm also taking night classes, trying to finish my degree. Sarah couldn't believe she was sharing personal details with Gregory Thorn. But his questions kept pulling honesty from her like a magnet drawing metal. What degree? Social work. I want to help families in crisis, children who've lost parents. The admission felt almost foolish in this temple of capitalism. I know it's not lucrative, but it matters to you. Sarah nodded, surprised by his understanding. Yes, sir. It matters. Gregory found himself studying this young woman with growing fascination. She lived in a world he'd never inhabited, one where financial security was a daily battle, where career choices were made based on meaning rather than profit, where other people's well-being took precedence over personal advancement. It was completely foreign to his experience, yet something about her earnestness resonated in a place he'd thought was permanently closed. Your mother's condition? He asked. Diabetes. It's gotten worse since my father died. The stress, the medical bills. Sarah caught herself. I'm sorry, sir. You didn't ask for my life story. I asked the questions that elicited your life story, Gregory pointed out. Therefore, I did ask for it. For the first time since entering his office, Sarah almost smiled. The logic was undeniably his, delivered with the same precision he probably applied to billion-dollar deals. Why are you asking me these things? She ventured. Gregory considered the question. Why was he asking? He'd never shown curiosity about an employee's personal circumstances before. People's motivations were generally irrelevant to their performance. Yet something about Sarah Chen's combination of vulnerability and strength had caught his attention in a way that felt almost uncomfortable. I'm trying to understand something, he said finally. What? How someone chooses hope over pragmatism. Sarah stared at him. Sir, you could have chosen any number of career paths that would provide immediate financial security. Instead, you're pursuing social work while supporting a sick parent and working multiple jobs. It's economically irrational, Maybe, Sarah agreed. But some things are more important than money. The statement hung in the air between them like a challenge. Gregory had built his entire existence on the principle that nothing was more important than money, that money was security, freedom, power, the solution to every problem. Yet here stood a woman who clearly understood the value of money but had chosen to prioritize something else entirely, such as purpose, connection, making sure other people don't have to face what my family has faced alone. Gregory felt something shift inside his chest, not quite emotion, but an awareness of emotion's possibility. For 32 years, he'd operated from the assumption that human connections were liabilities, that caring about others only created vulnerabilities his enemies could exploit. But Sarah Chen spoke about connection as if it were a source of strength rather than weakness. "I should let you return to your work," Gregory said, suddenly uncomfortable with the direction of his thoughts. Sarah nodded, gathering her supplies. As she moved toward the door, Gregory found himself speaking again. "Miss Chen," she turned back, eyebrows raised, "your observation about disorder feeling threatening." "You were correct." Sarah's expression softened slightly. "Everyone's afraid of something, sir. The trick is not letting the fear make our choices for us." After she left, Gregory sat alone in his perfectly ordered office, staring out at the Manhattan skyline. For the first time in years, he found himself questioning not what he wanted to acquire next, but what he might have lost along the way. The call to change had been issued not through dramatic confrontation, but through a simple conversation about hope, responsibility, and the courage to choose meaning over security. Gregory Thorn was still hours away from recognizing it as such, but the ice around his heart had developed its first, nearly imperceptible crack. 3 days after his unexpected conversation with Sarah Chen, Gregory Thorn found himself doing something unprecedented, actively seeking information about an employee. He'd never before cared about the personal circumstances of the thousands of people who worked for his company. But Sarah's words about choosing hope over pragmatism had lodged in his mind like a splinter he couldn't extract. Patricia Webb had been surprised by his request for Sarah's employment file, but she delivered it without question. Gregory studied the sparse document with the same intensity he usually reserved for merger agreements. Sarah Chen, age 23, address in Queens. Emergency contact listed as Maria Elena Chen, mother. Previous employment at 3 different companies, all service positions, all with glowing references that praised her reliability and work ethic. High school graduate, currently enrolled part-time at Hunter College, pursuing a bachelor's degree in social work. The file told him nothing about what had driven his curiosity, but it confirmed what he'd observed. Sarah Chen was exactly who she claimed to be. In Gregory's experience, such authenticity was rare to the point of being suspicious. Over the next week, Gregory began adjusting his schedule in subtle ways that would intersect with Sarah's cleaning routine. He told himself it was merely academic interest, a study in human motivation that might provide insights useful for managing his workforce. But beneath his rationalization lay something more unsettling, genuine curiosity about another person's inner life. Their second conversation occurred on a Thursday afternoon, when Gregory returned to his office, to find Sarah carefully dusting the bookshelf that contained his collection of business biographies. She worked with meticulous attention to detail, treating each volume as if it were valuable, rather than viewing the task as mere drudgery. "Do you read?" Gregory asked without preamble. Sarah startled but didn't drop anything this time. "Yes, sir. When I have time. What do you read?" "Whatever I can find at the library," Sarah replied, continuing her work but glancing at the book spines. "These all look like business books." "They are. Success stories, strategic thinking, leadership principles." Sarah nodded politely, but Gregory detected something in her expression, not dismissal exactly, but a kind of gentle skepticism. "You disapprove?" he asked. "It's not my place to approve or disapprove, sir." "That's not an answer." Sarah paused in her dusting, clearly debating how honest she could afford to be. I just wonder if reading only about success might give a limited perspective. Limited how? Well, Sarah chose her words carefully. Success stories usually don't include the people who got hurt along the way. The employees who lost jobs during restructuring, the communities affected when factories close. Those stories matter too. Gregory felt a flicker of irritation, not at her audacity, but at the uncomfortable truth in her observation. Business requires difficult decisions. Sentiment can't override economic reality. I'm not talking about sentiment, Sarah said quietly. I'm talking about consequences. When my father's construction company went bankrupt because they couldn't compete with a larger firm that paid workers less, that wasn't sentiment. That was someone's economic reality affecting our family's survival. The comment hung between them like a bridge Gregory could either cross or burn. He found himself studying Sarah's face as she spoke. The way her eyes reflected old pain, but no bitterness. The quiet strength in her voice when discussing her family's hardships. What would you have had that larger firm do? Gregory asked. Operate inefficiently out of charity? Maybe find ways to compete that didn't involve paying people poverty wages, Sarah suggested. Maybe consider that the cheapest option isn't always the most sustainable one in the long run. Gregory had heard similar arguments from social activists and labor organizers, people he'd always dismissed as economically naive. But hearing it from Sarah, who lived with the daily consequences of such decisions, gave the argument weight it had never carried before. You think I'm naive, Sarah said. Reading his expression, I think you're idealistic, Gregory corrected. There's a difference. What's the difference? Naive people don't understand the cost of their ideals. Idealistic people understand the cost, but choose to pay it anyway. Sarah considered this distinction. Which category do you think you fall into? The question was so unexpected that Gregory actually laughed, a short, rusty sound that surprised them both. I don't have ideals. I have objectives. Everyone has ideals, sir. Even if the ideal is just, I want to be in control of my circumstances. Again, her insight was uncomfortably accurate. Gregory's entire life structure was built around the ideal of absolute self-determination, the belief that enough money and power could insulate him from all vulnerability. Control is practical, not idealistic, he said. Is it working? The question was asked without judgment, but Gregory heard the challenge in it. Was it working? By every measurable standard, wealth, influence, business success, he'd achieved everything he'd set out to accomplish. Yet standing in this office, talking to a young woman who struggled to pay her mother's medical bills, but still chose to pursue a career helping others, Gregory felt something he couldn't quite name. Not envy exactly, but a recognition of something missing in his own carefully constructed existence. Define working, he said finally. Are you happy? Gregory stared at her. In his world, happiness was a juvenile concept, as irrelevant to adult life as believing in fairy tales. Success was measurable, happiness was not. Achievement could be quantified, satisfaction could not. He'd organized his entire existence around measurable outcomes, specifically to avoid such nebulous emotional territories. Happiness is not a useful metric, he said. Why not? Because it's subjective, temporary, based on feelings rather than facts. Sarah finished dusting the last book and turned to face him fully. My mother has diabetes, no health insurance, and we live in a one-bedroom apartment in Queens. But yesterday, she laughed so hard at something on television that she cried. For those 10 minutes, she was completely happy. How is that not useful? Gregory found himself without a ready answer. In his framework, Sarah's mother's situation was objectively dire. Medical costs mounting, limited income, uncertain future. The idea that happiness could exist within such circumstances challenged his fundamental understanding of how human satisfaction worked. 10 minutes of laughter doesn't solve diabetes, he said. No, Sarah agreed. But it makes the other 23 hours and 50 minutes bearable. Sometimes the thing that keeps you going isn't the solution, it's just the reminder that solutions are possible. Gregory felt that uncomfortable shifting sensation in his chest again, as if his ribcage were too small for something expanding inside it. Sarah's worldview operated on principles completely foreign to his experience, yet he couldn't dismiss them as foolish. There was wisdom in her approach to adversity that his wealth had never taught him. "You're suggesting that emotional satisfaction has practical value," he said. Working to understand her logic, "I'm suggesting that humans aren't machines," Sarah replied gently. "We don't run on efficiency alone. Connection, purpose, hope, these things aren't luxuries. They're fuel. Fuel for what? For choosing to keep trying when trying seems pointless. For helping other people when you can barely help yourself. For believing that tomorrow might be different from today." Gregory walked to his window, looking out at the city spread below him. From this height, individual people were invisible, reduced to patterns of traffic and commerce. It was a perspective he'd always found comforting, the view of someone who could observe without being observed, control without being controlled. "What if tomorrow isn't different?" he asked. "Then you try to make the day after that different," Sarah said simply. Gregory turned back to her. "That requires remarkable faith. It requires hope. And hope isn't faith, it's a choice. You choose to act as if change is possible, even when you can't guarantee it." As Sarah gathered her supplies to leave, Gregory made a decision that surprised him. "Miss Chen, would you be interested in additional work?" Sarah paused. "What kind of work, sir?" "I'm considering some research into employee satisfaction and workplace efficiency. I could use someone with your perspective to provide insights." It was a fabrication, but not entirely dishonest. Gregory was genuinely curious about how Sarah's approach to human motivation might apply to business operations. More than that, he realized he wanted to continue these conversations, to understand how someone chose hope when circumstances suggested despair. Sarah looked skeptical. "I don't have any business training, sir." "You have something more valuable," Gregory said. "You understand what matters to people who aren't wealthy." After Sarah agreed to think about his proposal, Gregory sat alone in his office, staring at the spot where she'd stood. For the first time in his adult life, he was contemplating changing his fundamental approach to human relationships. Not because it would make him more money, but because it might make him more than just a machine that accumulated wealth. The commitment to transformation was still unconscious, buried beneath layers of rationalization and professional justification. But like a seed that had found fertile ground, it was beginning to take root in the cracks Sarah's questions had opened in his carefully constructed worldview. 2 weeks into their informal arrangement, Gregory Thorn did something that shocked his entire executive team. He cancelled a board meeting to attend a company-wide employee satisfaction survey presentation that Sarah had helped prepare. The boardroom fell silent when Patricia announced the change, followed by whispered speculation about whether their CEO was having some kind of breakdown. Gregory ignored the gossip. For the first time in his corporate career, he was more interested in understanding his workforce than maximizing quarterly profits. Sarah's insights had been revelatory, not because they were revolutionary, but because they were obvious truths he'd systematically ignored for years. The presentation took place in the building's main conference room, a space Gregory rarely visited because it was designed for middle management rather than executive decision-making. As he entered, conversations stopped and heads turned. His presence was so unexpected that several employees actually looked around to see if there was some emergency that had driven him from his tower office. Sarah stood at the front of the room with James Morrison from Human Resources, looking both professional and nervous in a navy blazer that was clearly borrowed. She'd spent the previous week conducting informal interviews with employees across all departments: janitors, accountants, security guards, administrative assistants, asking questions about job satisfaction, workplace stress, and what would make their work experience better. "Mr. Thorn," James began, clearly flustered by the unexpected executive presence. "We weren't expecting. I mean, this is just a preliminary review of... Proceed with the presentation, Gregory said, taking a seat in the back row. I'm here to listen. Sarah stepped forward, and Gregory noticed she didn't use the nervous apologies that had characterized their first meeting. Working on this project had given her confidence, a sense of purpose that translated into quiet authority. We surveyed 847 employees across all departments, Sarah began, clicking to the first slide. The results showed some patterns that might surprise management. The data was presented simply but effectively. Job satisfaction correlated more strongly with feeling heard and respected than with salary levels. Employees who felt their supervisors recognized their contributions were 73% less likely to seek employment elsewhere. The single most requested improvement wasn't better pay or benefits. It was regular feedback and acknowledgement of good work. People want to feel like their efforts matter, Sarah explained, her voice growing stronger as she warmed to her subject. They want to know that someone notices when they stay late to finish a project or when they help a co-worker solve a problem. Gregory watched the faces around him. Department heads, supervisors, long-time employees he'd passed in hallways for years without acknowledging. Many were nodding, some were taking notes, others looked skeptical. But all of them were engaged in a way he rarely saw during mandatory corporate presentations. The second finding was about communication, Sarah continued. Employees at every level reported feeling disconnected from the company's larger purpose. They know their individual tasks, but don't understand how their work contributes to overall success. She clicked to a slide showing quotes from the interviews. Gregory read them with growing recognition. I file reports but don't know what happens to them. I process invoices but never see how that helps the company grow. I feel like a replaceable part in a machine I don't understand. Recommendations? Gregory asked, speaking for the first time since the presentation began. Sarah glanced at James, who nodded encouragingly. Regular departmental meetings where supervisors explain how individual work connects to company goals. Monthly recognition programs that highlight exceptional effort, not just exceptional results, and... She paused, looking directly at Gregory. Leadership visibility. Employees want to see executives occasionally, not just during crisis situations. The room fell silent. Sarah had essentially suggested that Gregory, who prided himself on efficient distance from operational details, should become more personally involved with his workforce. Leadership visibility, Gregory repeated. Elaborate. Simple things, Sarah said, though Gregory could hear the slight tremor in her voice as she challenged him publicly. Walking through departments occasionally, eating lunch in the employee cafeteria rather than private dining rooms, acknowledging people by name when you pass them in hallways. James Morrison looked like he was about to faint. Suggesting that Gregory Thorn should eat cafeteria food and learn employees' names was career suicide in most corporate environments. But Gregory surprised everyone, including himself. How many employees work in this building, Miss Chen? 1247, sir. And you believe I should learn all their names? Sarah lifted her chin slightly. I believe you should try to learn some of them. Start with people who've worked here over 5 years, people who supervise others, people who directly impact operations you care about. Gregory considered this. In his worldview, employees were human resources, valuable but interchangeable assets managed by department heads. The idea of personal relationships with subordinates had always seemed inefficient, potentially compromising. But Sarah's data suggested that his approach might be creating inefficiencies he'd never measured. What would be the return on investment for such? Personal engagement? He asked. Sarah smiled, not the nervous expression he'd grown accustomed to, but something warmer and more confident. According to our exit interviews, replacing a good employee costs approximately 1.5 times their annual salary when you factor in recruiting, training, and productivity losses. If recognition and engagement reduce turnover by even 15%, the ROI would be substantial. She was speaking his language now, translating emotional intelligence into financial terms he could readily understand. But Gregory realized she was also doing something more sophisticated, showing him that his business success and human connection weren't mutually exclusive. After the presentation, Gregory lingered as employees filed out. Many of them looked at him with curiosity rather than the usual fearful respect, as if seeing him in this context had made him slightly more human in their eyes. Sarah was packing up her materials when Gregory approached. "The presentation was well prepared," he said. "Thank you, sir." The employees were very honest in their responses. They want to do good work. "And you believe good work requires emotional satisfaction. I believe good work requires understanding why the work matters," Sarah corrected gently. "When people know their purpose, they find their own motivation." Gregory nodded slowly. "I'd like to implement some of these recommendations. Will you help develop the protocols?" Sarah's face lit up with genuine pleasure. Not the calculated smile of someone angling for advancement, but the joy of someone whose ideas were being taken seriously. "I'd be honored to help, sir. There's one condition," Gregory added. "I want you to teach me the names of the employees you think I should know." Sarah stared at him. "Sir, you suggested I learn names. I'm accepting your suggestion. But I'll need instruction on who these people are and why they matter." It was such an unexpected request that Sarah was momentarily speechless. The idea of tutoring Gregory Thorn in basic human relations was both intimidating and oddly touching. "I can do that," she said finally. Over the next week, Gregory began what he privately called the experiment. At Sarah's suggestion, he started with the security guards, learning the names of the 3 men who'd protected his building for years, without ever receiving more than a nod of acknowledgement. Frank Rodriguez had worked the night shift for 8 years and was studying for his real estate license. David Park had 2 daughters in college and coached youth soccer on weekends. Michael Thompson was a veteran who'd served 3 tours in Afghanistan before taking the day shift position. Learning these details felt strange to Gregory, not because the information was complicated, but because it required him to see these men as individuals rather than functions. When he greeted Frank by name during a late evening at the office, the man's surprised smile created an unfamiliar warmth in Gregory's chest. Sarah also introduced him to Maria Santos, the head of accounting, who'd caught a major billing error that saved the company $200,000 the previous year. To Jennifer Walsh, the facilities coordinator who'd negotiated energy-efficient lighting upgrades that reduced operational costs by 12%. To Robert Chen, the IT specialist who'd prevented 3 separate cyber attacks without fanfare or recognition. Each introduction revealed competent, dedicated people whose contributions Gregory had never acknowledged because he'd never looked closely enough to see them. Sarah was right. These weren't just human resources. They were humans whose resourcefulness directly benefited his company. The breakthrough came on a Thursday afternoon when Gregory encountered Maria Santos replacing a broken light bulb in the supply closet. Instead of walking past as he would have done a month earlier, he stopped. "Maria," he said, testing out the name. "How are the quarterly reconciliations progressing?" Maria nearly dropped the light bulb. Gregory Thorn had not only used her name, but had asked about her specific work with apparent genuine interest. "Very well, Mr. Thorn," she managed. "We're actually ahead of schedule this quarter." "Good. I appreciate your attention to detail." As Gregory continued down the hallway, he realized something had fundamentally shifted. For the first time in his adult life, he'd engaged with an employee as a person rather than a position. The interaction had taken 30 seconds and cost him nothing, yet he could see its impact in Maria's expression. Validation, recognition, increased loyalty. Sarah had been right about more than employee satisfaction metrics. She'd been right about the basic human need to be seen and valued. Gregory was beginning to understand that his emotional isolation hadn't just cost him personal relationships, it had made him a less effective leader and, perhaps, a less complete human being. The first breakthrough had occurred not in a dramatic moment of revelation, but in a simple exchange of recognition between two people who shared the same workspace. Gregory Thorn was learning to see the humanity in others, and in doing so, he was beginning to rediscover his own. 3 weeks into Gregory's transformation experiment, disaster struck from an unexpected direction. It began with a phone call at 5:23 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, the kind of call that arrives before dawn and changes everything. Sarah's voice was barely recognizable through tears and exhaustion. "Mr. Thorn, I'm so sorry to call you directly, but I won't be able to come to work today. My mother, she's in the hospital." Gregory sat up in bed, instantly alert despite the early hour. He'd given Sarah his direct number for their project coordination, never expecting it to be used for personal emergencies. "What happened?" he asked, surprising himself with the genuine concern in his voice. Her blood sugar crashed during the night. "She went into diabetic shock." "The paramedics," Sarah's voice broke completely. "They said if I hadn't found her when I did." Gregory found himself standing, pacing his bedroom in expensive pajamas, feeling helpless in a way that was completely foreign to his experience. "Which hospital?" "Queen's General. But, sir, I don't know how long I'll need to be away from work. The doctors are saying she needs intensive monitoring, and our insurance—" "Don't worry about work," Gregory said immediately. "Take whatever time you need." After ending the call, Gregory stood in his penthouse, looking out at the pre-dawn city, experiencing an emotion he couldn't immediately name. It took him several minutes to recognize it as fear, not for himself, but for someone else. The realization was deeply unsettling. By 7 a.m., Gregory had done something unprecedented. He'd researched Queen's General Hospital, learned about their cardiac care unit, and made 3 phone calls to medical professionals in his network. By 9 a.m., he'd arranged for Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, one of Manhattan's top endocrinologists, to consult on Maria Chen's case. Patricia Webb was stunned when Gregory instructed her to handle the medical consultation expenses as a company expense. "So she's not technically a salaried employee. The cleaning staff are contracted through an outside service. Then change her status," Gregory said curtly. "Effective immediately, Sarah Chen is a direct employee with full health benefits." What Gregory didn't anticipate was the pushback from his executive team. The transformation he'd been experiencing, learning names, showing interest in employee welfare, attending departmental meetings, had been noticed and discussed in the corporate hierarchy. Some viewed it as positive leadership evolution. Others saw it as dangerous weakness. The confrontation came during Thursday's board meeting, 2 days after Maria Chen's hospitalization. The quarterly financials were strong, but several board members had concerns that went beyond profit margins. "Gregory," said Richard Blackstone, a board member who'd worked with Gregory's father for 30 years. "There are rumors about some unusual management approaches you've been implementing." Gregory looked up from the financial reports. "Such as?" "Learning janitors' names, eating in the employee cafeteria, getting personally involved in staff medical issues." Blackstone's tone suggested these activities were somewhere between eccentric and scandalous. "I fail to see how improved employee relations constitute a problem," Gregory replied evenly. "The problem," interjected Sandra Morrison, the board's longest-serving member, "is that it suggests emotional compromise. You've built this company on rational decision-making. Sentiment is a luxury that CEOs of your level cannot afford." Gregory felt the familiar ground of logical argument beneath his feet, but something had shifted in his perspective. A month ago, he would have agreed with Sandra's assessment completely. Now her words felt like an attack on principles he was only beginning to understand. Employee satisfaction directly correlates with productivity and retention, Gregory said. There's nothing emotional about maximizing human capital efficiency. Really? Richard leaned forward. Then explain the Sarah Chen situation. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Gregory realized that his board members had been monitoring his activities more closely than he'd imagined. and they'd identified Sarah as the catalyst for his behavioral changes. Miss Chen has provided valuable insights into employee engagement strategies. Gregory said carefully, Miss Chen is a cleaning woman with no business education who somehow convinced you to spend company money on her mother's medical care. Sandra said bluntly. That's not strategy, Gregory. That's manipulation. The word hit Gregory like a physical blow. Manipulation. Was that what this was? Had Sarah's apparent sincerity and insight been calculated to exploit his previously unknown capacity for human connection? Furthermore, Richard continued, the other executives are concerned about your recent accessibility. You can't run a billion-dollar company by consensus and group hugs. Tough decisions require emotional distance. What tough decisions? Gregory asked. Though he suspected he knew where this conversation was heading, Sandra slid a folder across the conference table. The Denver facility. The quarterly numbers show it's 23% below projected profitability. Standard protocol would be immediate closure with workforce reduction. Gregory opened the folder, seeing the familiar cold mathematics of corporate efficiency. The Denver facility employed 312 people. Closure would save $3.2 million annually while eliminating jobs in a community that depended heavily on Thorn Industries for economic stability. The recommendation is closure? Gregory asked. Obviously, Richard said. It's what you would have decided automatically 6 months ago. Before you started this experiment in corporate sentimentality, Gregory stared at the numbers, feeling the weight of 312 families whose livelihoods hung in the balance. 6 months ago, this would have been simple arithmetic. Cut losses, optimize resources, maximize shareholder value. But now he found himself thinking about Frank Rodriguez's daughters in college, about Maria Santos getting ahead of schedule on quarterly reconciliations, about Sarah's mother fighting for her life in a Queen's hospital. I need time to review the options, Gregory said finally. The boardroom fell silent. Richard and Sandra exchanged glances that spoke volumes about their concerns regarding Gregory's decision-making capacity. Gregory, Sandra said softly, we're worried about you. This emotional involvement with employees isn't healthy for someone in your position. Perhaps you should consider taking some time away, getting perspective. The suggestion was politely phrased, but Gregory understood its implications. His board was questioning his fitness to lead, suggesting that his newfound interest in human connection was a liability rather than an asset. That evening, Gregory sat alone in his office long after the building had emptied, staring at the Denver facility folder. The old Gregory would have signed the closure order without hesitation. The emerging Gregory wondered if there might be alternatives, efficiency improvements, market expansion, restructuring that could save jobs while maintaining profitability. But doubt was creeping in. Were Sandra and Richard right? Had he allowed emotional compromise to cloud his judgment? Was Sarah Chen manipulating him, playing on sympathies he'd never known he possessed? The questions multiplied as the night wore on. By dawn, Gregory was exhausted and more confused than he'd been since childhood. He'd built his entire identity on rational decision-making and emotional detachment. If those principles were flawed, then who was Gregory Thorn? And if they were correct, then what did that make his recent transformation, growth or weakness? When Sarah called that morning to report that her mother was stable but would need extended rehabilitation, Gregory found himself studying her voice for signs of calculation, listening for the manipulation his board members had suggested. But all he heard was exhaustion, gratitude, and genuine concern for her mother's recovery. "Sir, I know I've been away from work during a critical time," Sarah said. "If you need to replace me on the project—" "No," Gregory said quickly, then wondered if his response was professional judgment or emotional compromise. "Take the time you need with your mother." After ending the call, Gregory realized he was facing the first real test of his transformation. The Denver facility decision couldn't be delayed indefinitely. His board was watching for signs that sentiment was overriding strategy. And somewhere in Queens, Sarah Chen was caring for her mother. unaware that her influence on Gregory Thorn was being questioned by some of the most powerful people in corporate America. The major setback wasn't a single dramatic event. It was the accumulation of doubt, pressure, and the dawning recognition that changing his fundamental nature might cost Gregory everything he'd spent his life building. For the first time since beginning this journey, he wondered if the price of becoming more human might be losing the very foundation of his identity and success. The ice around his heart, which had been slowly thawing, began to refreeze as fear and uncertainty overwhelmed the fragile warmth Sarah had helped him discover. Gregory Thorn stood at a crossroads, with his old life pulling him back toward familiar cold efficiency, and his new understanding offering an uncertain path toward something he couldn't yet name or trust. Gregory Thorn hadn't slept properly in 4 days. The Denver facility decision deadline loomed. His board's accusations echoed in his mind, and Sarah's continued absence left him isolated with his doubts. By Friday evening he was exhausted, confused, and dangerously close to reverting to the cold efficiency that had defined his life before Sarah Chen had walked into his office. The revelation came from the most unexpected source. Marcus Williams, his driver of 8 years. Gregory had always maintained strict protocol with Marcus, no conversation beyond destination confirmations, the partition always closed, professional distance preserved at all times. But as they sat in traffic on the way to another sleepless night in his penthouse, Gregory found himself breaking his own rules. "Marcus," he said through the intercom, startling the older man. "Pull over." "Sir? Is everything all right?" "Just pull over. I need to ask you something." Marcus found a parking space on Madison Avenue, his confusion evident in the rearview mirror. Gregory lowered the partition, something he'd never done in 8 years of rides. "How long have you worked for me?" Gregory asked. 8 years, 3 months, sir. In that time, what have you observed about my management style?" Marcus shifted uncomfortably in the driver's seat. This conversation violated every protocol of their professional relationship, but Gregory's tone suggested it was genuinely important. "Sir, I'm not sure I should—" "I'm asking for your honest assessment," Gregory said. "There will be no professional consequences for your answer." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing his words carefully. "You've always been very focused, sir, very contained. You treat business like a chess game, everything calculated, nothing left to chance." "And recently?" "Recently," Marcus paused, "you seem different, more aware of the people around you, like you're seeing things that were always there, but you weren't looking at before." Gregory studied Marcus's reflection in the mirror. "Do you think that makes me weak?" The question seemed to surprise Marcus. "Weak? No, sir. If anything, it makes you seem more complete." "Complete?" Marcus turned in his seat to face Gregory directly. "My daughter works in your accounting department. Maria Santos?" Gregory's eyes widened. He'd never made the connection. "When you learned her name, when you thanked her for her work last week, she called me crying that night. Happy crying. In 15 years of working various jobs, she'd never had a boss who saw her as more than a number on a payroll." Gregory felt something shift inside his chest. "She's your daughter, my eldest. Graduated from community college while working full-time. Paid off her student loans ahead of schedule. Caught that billing error that saved your company $200,000. Marcus's voice carried quiet pride. "She's brilliant, dedicated, and before last week she was invisible to the people who mattered most in her professional life." The weight of this revelation settled over Gregory like a blanket. Maria Santos, whom he'd acknowledged in passing last week, wasn't just a competent employee. She was the daughter of a man who'd driven him safely through Manhattan traffic for 8 years. A man Gregory had never truly seen until this moment. "Why didn't you tell me?" Gregory asked. "Because that's not how our world works, sir. Drivers don't talk about their families to executives. Employees don't expect personal recognition from CEOs. We do our jobs, collect our paychecks, and hope to stay invisible enough to keep both." Gregory was quiet for several minutes, processing this information alongside everything his board had said about emotional compromise and manipulation. "Marcus, do you think I'm being manipulated?" "By who?" "Miss Chen, the woman who's been helping with employee engagement initiatives." Marcus smiled, the first genuine expression Gregory had ever seen from him. "You mean the young lady who spent her lunch breaks last week visiting employees who were too shy to participate in the satisfaction survey? Who made sure the night shift workers had their voices heard, even though she had to stay late to interview them?" Gregory hadn't known about Sarah's additional efforts. "She did that?" "She did more than that. She asked about our families, our goals, what would make work better for us. Not because she had to, but because she cared about the answers." Marcus met Gregory's eyes in the mirror. "Sir, if that's manipulation, it's the kindest manipulation I've ever experienced." The conversation with Marcus shattered something fundamental in Gregory's understanding of the situation. His board had painted Sarah as calculating and opportunistic, exploiting his newfound emotional vulnerability for personal gain. But the evidence suggested something entirely different. A young woman genuinely committed to improving conditions for people who were usually overlooked and undervalued. "Marcus, I need to make a stop before going home." "Where to, sir?" "Queen's General Hospital." The drive to Queens took 45 minutes through Friday evening traffic. During the journey, Gregory found himself asking Marcus about his other children, his wife's work as a teacher, his own background before becoming a driver. Each answer revealed layers of complexity and humanity that Gregory had systematically ignored for nearly a decade. By the time they reached the hospital, Gregory understood something crucial. His transformation wasn't weakness, it was sight. Sarah hadn't manipulated him into caring about other people. She'd simply helped him see what had always been there. Queen's General was nothing like the private medical facilities Gregory was accustomed to. The lobby was crowded with families in various states of worry and exhaustion. The decor was functional rather than elegant, and the staff moved with the efficient urgency of people managing too many patients with too few resources. Gregory found Sarah in the ICU waiting area, asleep in an uncomfortable chair with her head resting on a pile of medical forms. She looked younger than her 23 years, exhausted by days of worry and hospital vigil. Her clothes were rumpled, her hair needed washing, and there were stress lines around her eyes that hadn't been there a week ago. As Gregory approached, Sarah woke with the startled alertness of someone who'd been sleeping lightly, ready to respond to any change in her mother's condition. "Mr. Thorn?" she said, clearly shocked by his presence. "What are you doing here?" "I came to check on your mother's condition," Gregory said, taking the seat beside her. "And to apologize." "Apologize for what?" "For doubting your motives. My board suggested that you were manipulating me, exploiting some weakness they perceived in my recent behavior." Gregory looked directly at her. "I allowed their skepticism to cloud my judgment about your character." Sarah's expression shifted from confusion to understanding. "They think I'm using you. They think emotional engagement makes me a less effective leader." Sarah was quiet for a moment, processing this information. "Are you here to tell me they're right?" "No," Gregory said firmly. "I'm here to tell them they're wrong, and to ask how your mother is doing." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but of relief and gratitude. "She's stable. The specialist you sent, Dr. Morrison, she's amazing. The treatment plan she developed is already showing results. Good. When your mother is ready for discharge, I want her moved to a rehabilitation facility with better resources than what your current insurance covers." "Sir, I can't accept—" "You're not accepting charity," Gregory interrupted. "You're accepting support from someone who values your contribution to this company and cares about your family's well-being." Sarah stared at him. "You care?" The question was so simple, yet it cut to the heart of everything Gregory had been struggling with. Did he care? 6 months ago, the answer would have been an automatic no. Caring was weakness, attachment was vulnerability, emotion was inefficiency. But looking at Sarah's exhausted face, thinking about Marcus's pride in his daughter, remembering the smile on Maria Santos's face when he'd acknowledged her work, Gregory realized that caring wasn't weakness. It was connection. It was the difference between managing human resources and leading actual humans. "Yes," he said quietly, "I care. About your mother's recovery, about your ability to complete your degree, about the 312 families whose jobs depend on the Denver facility decision I have to make on Monday." Sarah's expression shifted to concern. "The Denver facility? My board wants me to close it. Standard efficiency protocol. But I keep thinking about the people who work there, people with families, mortgages, dreams that depend on those jobs." Sarah leaned forward. "What do you want to do?" "I want to find a way to save those jobs without compromising the company's stability. But I don't know if that's possible, and I don't know if trying makes me compassionate or naive." Sarah smiled, the first genuinely happy expression he'd seen from her all week. "It makes you human, and being human doesn't disqualify you from being an effective leader. It might actually make you better at it." As Gregory sat in that hospital waiting room, surrounded by the controlled chaos of families dealing with medical crises, he experienced complete clarity for the first time in weeks. His board was wrong. Emotional engagement wasn't weakness, it was wisdom. Caring about his employees' well-being wasn't manipulation, it was leadership. And Sarah Chen wasn't exploiting his vulnerability. She was helping him discover his strength. The revelation was simple but profound. He could be both successful and compassionate, both profitable and humane. The choice wasn't between cold efficiency and emotional chaos. It was between managing things and leading people. Gregory Thorn was ready to return to his company, not as the Ice King his board expected, but as a leader who understood that the greatest strength wasn't in controlling others, but in connecting with them. Monday morning arrived with the crisp clarity that only comes after a storm has passed. Gregory Thorn stood in his penthouse at 5:30 a.m., not checking market fluctuations on his phone, but looking out at the Manhattan skyline with eyes that saw the city differently than they had just months before. Somewhere in those buildings were thousands of people beginning their workdays, people with names, families, dreams, and stories that mattered. Today would be the day everything changed permanently. At 8 a.m. sharp, Gregory walked into the Thorn Industries boardroom where Sandra Morrison, Richard Blackstone, and the other board members waited with the Denver facility closure documents ready for his signature. The room carried the familiar weight of corporate authority, but Gregory no longer felt intimidated by their collective expectation of cold efficiency. "Gentlemen," "Sandra," Gregory began, taking his seat at the head of the polished mahogany table, "I've reached a decision about the Denver facility." "Excellent," Richard said, sliding the closure documents across the table. "The legal team has prepared everything. One signature eliminates the quarterly losses and frees up capital for more profitable ventures." Gregory looked at the papers but didn't reach for his pen. "I'm not closing Denver." The boardroom fell silent. Sandra's expression shifted from confidence to concern. "Gregory," she said carefully, "we discussed this. The facility is underperforming. Sentiment cannot override financial reality." "You're absolutely right," Gregory agreed. "Sentiment cannot override financial reality. But this isn't sentiment, it's strategy." He stood, walking to the presentation screen at the front of the room. With the confidence of someone who had spent the weekend developing a comprehensive plan, rather than wallowing in doubt, Gregory began his presentation. Denver employs 312 people in a community where Thorn Industries is the largest private employer. Closing the facility would save $3.2 million annually in the short term. However, I've identified several factors that make closure a poor long-term investment. Click. The first slide showed Denver's economic impact analysis. Our presence in Denver generates approximately $47 million in regional economic activity annually. Plant closure would devastate the local economy, damaging relationships with political leaders whose support we need for future expansion in Colorado. Wyoming and Utah. Click market analysis data. Second, Denver's strategic location makes it ideal for Western distribution. Rather than closure, I'm proposing modernization. A $12 million technology upgrade would increase efficiency by 34%, reduce waste by 28%, and position the facility as our Western headquarters. Richard frowned. That's a significant capital investment with uncertain returns. The returns are quite certain, Gregory continued. Employee retention in modernized facilities averages 23% higher than industry standard. Reduced turnover alone would save approximately $1.8 million annually in recruiting and training costs. Click employee satisfaction correlation data. Third, and most importantly, Denver has the highest employee satisfaction scores of any Thorn Industries facility. High satisfaction correlates directly with productivity, innovation, and customer service quality. Closing our best-performing location to save money would be strategically counterproductive. Sandra studied the presentation with growing surprise. Where did you get this analysis? I spent the weekend in Denver, Gregory said simply. I met with facility managers, talked to employees, reviewed operations personally, and consulted with local economic development officials. I also brought in Sarah Chen to conduct employee interviews and provide insights into operational improvements. The mention of Sarah's name caused visible tension around the table. Richard leaned forward aggressively. Gregory, this proves our point. You're allowing personal involvement to cloud your business judgment. Sarah Chen is not qualified to make strategic recommendations for a multi-million-dollar facility. Gregory smiled. Not the cold, calculated expression his board members were accustomed to, but something warmer and more confident. You're wrong, Richard. Sarah Chen is uniquely qualified to understand what motivates people to do their best work. Her recommendations for Denver include cross-training programs that would increase operational flexibility by 40%, recognition systems that cost virtually nothing but dramatically improve morale, and communication improvements that would reduce errors and increase efficiency. Click implementation timeline and projected results. The modernization plan, combined with Sarah's operational insights, projects a return to full profitability within 18 months, followed by 15% growth annually thereafter. More importantly, it demonstrates to all Thorn Industries employees that we invest in success rather than abandoning challenges. Gregory could see the board members processing this information, their skepticism battling against the compelling financial projections. There's one more factor to consider, Gregory continued. Over the past month, I've implemented employee recognition programs, improved communication protocols, and increased leadership visibility across all our facilities. The results have been remarkable. Click company-wide performance metrics. Productivity is up 11% system-wide. Employee turnover is down 19%. Customer satisfaction scores have reached all-time highs. Most significantly, 3 employees have submitted innovative process improvements that will save the company over $2 million annually. Sandra stared at the data. These improvements happened in just 1 month? They happened when we started treating employees as assets to develop rather than expenses to minimize, Gregory said. Sarah Chen didn't manipulate me into weakness. She taught me that our greatest competitive advantage isn't technology or capital. It's the human talent we've been systematically undervaluing. Richard shook his head. This is all very interesting, Gregory, but employee satisfaction doesn't guarantee long-term profitability. No, Gregory agreed, but it creates the conditions where long-term profitability becomes sustainable rather than dependent on constant cost-cutting and layoffs. He returned to his seat, looking each board member in the eye with the confidence of someone who had found his true leadership voice. I'm not asking for your approval to save Denver out of misplaced compassion. I'm informing you that closing Denver would be a strategic mistake that prioritizes short-term savings over long-term growth. The data supports modernization, not closure. Over the next hour, Gregory fielded questions, presented additional analyses, and systematically addressed every concern his board raised. By 10 a.m., he had unanimous approval for the Denver modernization plan and a mandate to implement similar employee engagement strategies across all Thorn Industries facilities. As the board members filed out, Sandra approached Gregory privately. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly. "We thought you were losing your edge. Instead, you found something we didn't know you were missing." "What's that?" "The ability to inspire loyalty instead of just demanding compliance." That afternoon, Gregory made 2 phone calls that completed his transformation. The first was to Sarah, who was still at the hospital with her mother. "The Denver facility is staying open," he told her. "Your recommendations were instrumental in developing the modernization plan. When your mother is ready, I'd like to offer you a permanent position as Director of Employee Engagement. The salary is $85,000 annually with full benefits, and your primary responsibility would be implementing programs that help our employees thrive." Sarah's silence lasted so long that Gregory wondered if the call had dropped. "Sir," she finally said, her voice thick with emotion, "I don't know what to say." "Say yes. Your mother needs stability during her recovery. You deserve recognition for your talents, and this company needs leaders who understand that business success and human dignity aren't mutually exclusive." "Yes," Sarah whispered. "Yes, absolutely." The second call was to Marcus. "Marcus, I have a proposition for you. How would you feel about transitioning from driving to facility management? I need someone I trust to oversee the Denver modernization project, and your insights into employee relations would be invaluable." "Sir, I don't have management experience. You have something better. You understand people. You've watched leadership from a unique perspective for 8 years, and your daughter speaks very highly of your judgment. The position includes relocation assistance, a substantial salary increase, and the opportunity to build something meaningful." 6 months later, Gregory stood in the modernized Denver facility, watching employees who had feared for their jobs now training on state-of-the-art equipment. Productivity was exceeding projections, morale was at record highs, and 3 other companies had inquired about adopting similar employee engagement models. Marcus approached with the monthly performance report. No longer Gregory's driver, but his trusted facility manager and friend. "The numbers keep improving," Marcus said, handing over the documents. "Maria wanted me to tell you that the accounting integration between Denver and New York is ahead of schedule." Gregory smiled. "How is she enjoying her promotion?" "She loves being regional finance coordinator. Having someone who believes in her abilities has made all the difference." That evening, Gregory returned to his Manhattan penthouse. The same physical space, but no longer a monument to isolation. The walls now displayed photographs, the Denver facility opening, the company picnic where he'd met employees' families, Sarah receiving her college diploma with her mother in the audience, Marcus cutting the ribbon on the new training center. Sarah arrived at 7 p.m. for their weekly strategy meeting, but also because they developed a friendship that transcended their professional relationship. She was no longer the nervous cleaning woman who'd spilled solution on his floor, but a confident professional whose insights were sought by other companies impressed by Thorn Industries' transformation. "How's your mother?" Gregory asked as they settled in his living room, a space that now felt warm and welcoming rather than coldly elegant, strong as ever. "She starts her new job at the community center next week, helping other families navigate medical crises." Sarah smiled. "She says surviving her health scare taught her that helping others heal helps her heal too." "Wise woman." "She wants to meet the man who saved our family," Sarah said. "I told her you'd be honored to meet her, but that she's got it backwards. We saved each other." Gregory considered this perspective. 6 months ago, he'd been the richest man in most rooms, but the poorest in terms of human connection. He'd built an empire but lived in emotional exile. Sarah Chen's arrival had been the catalyst, but the transformation had required his choice to value relationships alongside results. "Do you ever miss the simplicity of your old approach?" Sarah asked. "When decisions were just about numbers?" Gregory looked out at the Manhattan skyline, thinking about the thousands of employees whose names he was learning, whose families he was meeting, whose potential he was helping develop. "No," he said honestly. "Numbers told me what was happening, but they never told me why it mattered. Understanding people, understanding why they work, what they need to succeed, how they contribute to something larger than themselves, that's what makes the numbers meaningful." Sarah nodded. "You've become the leader people choose to follow, not just the boss they have to obey." "We've become a company that people are proud to work for," Gregory corrected. That transformation took both of us. As Sarah prepared to leave, she paused at the door. "Gregory, can I ask you something personal?" "Of course. Are you happy?" The question that had once seemed irrelevant now felt central to everything. Gregory thought about his answer, not in terms of sentiment or emotion, but in terms of truth. "I'm fulfilled," he said finally. "I wake up excited about the work we're doing, the people we're helping succeed, the company we're building together. If that's happiness, then yes, I'm happy." After Sarah left, Gregory stood alone in his penthouse, no longer surrounded by cold perfection, but by evidence of human connection and shared purpose. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to balance profit with people, new chances to prove that successful business and genuine humanity could coexist. The ice around Gregory Thorn's heart had melted completely, replaced by something far more powerful. The understanding that true strength comes not from emotional isolation, but from the courage to connect, to care, and to lead with both mind and heart. In the end, Sarah Chen's tears hadn't just melted the frozen heart of a billionaire. They had revealed the human being who had been waiting underneath all along. And that revelation had transformed not just Gregory Thorn, but everyone whose life he touched, creating ripples of positive change that would continue long after the story ended. The Ice King had become a leader. The isolated billionaire had become a connected human being. And Thorn Industries had become living proof that the best business decisions are often the most humane ones. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.